No One Lives Under the Lighthouse Director's Cut is a retro-inspired first-person horror game that follows a lighthouse keeper as he experiences bizarre and horrifying events whilst tending the lighthouse. Atmosphere. As if isolation isn't bad enough, there's an unknown, incomprehensible horror lurking on the barren, lonely island that the lighthouse is situated on. Its presence is unmistakable, and to add further to the mystery, the previous lighthouse keeper has disappeared. The game's title is enough to imply that you are in fact not alone in the lighthouse, and the eerie environments and PlayStation 1 graphics only seem to make things more foreboding. Strange events keep happening, from the subtle to the fantastical, and it feels like your sanity is slowly draining away as you've realised that the only way to keep going is to continue setting up the lighthouse, no matter what supernatural forces try to prevent that from happening. The first few days are bewildering as the atmosphere cranks things up from intense apprehension to pure dread as you wait to see what will happen next. What makes things worse is the lack of an identifiable form to what's really tormenting the player. It makes you feel like you're being messed with. But after moving below the lighthouse, things take on a more unearthly tone as the game transitions to impossible cosmic horror environments of ancient structures and effigies to things you don't understand. The traditional PlayStation draw distance has been reimagined as a stifling fog, and the sound of something with too many legs is heard furiously clawing around in the distance as you check human remains for shotgun shells. The atmosphere is really the highlight of this game. It changes and manages to keep on presenting the player with more unsettling scenes and new reasons to be afraid, while showing them as little as possible, until you're thrown in the deep end. Needless to say, I'm a fan of what the game has turned into. That's one Harry Mason. Scares. The early game has a lot of moments where the player is completely out of their depth against the seemingly unstoppable things happening around them. From bugs swarming the lighthouse lamp room to sickly black trails spiraling up the lighthouse staircase left by some unknown creature, it manages to invoke that cosmic horror vibe, the fear of the unknown and the utter confusion as you feel like you're witnessing things that no one should see, the uncanny. Though the game has more than enough down-to-earth horror elements as well, with things like the second-person chase sequences which are so out of the left field that you don't see them coming. There's lots of creepy events in the early game, like the Keeper's shadow projecting forward as you descend into the darkness under the lighthouse, or witnessing something falling from one of the windows, but finding nothing outside. The game is incredibly good at messing with the player. The latter game again has more of a traditional survival horror vibe, with trying to solve puzzles whilst the giant bug creatures try to devour you, unless you can scare them off or kill them with a shotgun blast. The game has no on-screen display and requires you to remember if you've reloaded your gun or not, before it's too late. The game retains its reverse horror sections where you play as the monster, and I find a lot of these less frightening and a lot less fun this time around, with the final boss against a shotgun-wielding lighthouse keeper to be more frustrating than anything. But the game redeems itself with the outro sequence cutting to the iconic "previous keeper disappeared" lines, implying that it all begins again. Sound design. The music in the game is really just intense droning from analog synths and the piano from the record player, and it works to great effect to instill a feeling of dread. There's heavy reverb on the sound effects as you climb up and down the staircase, and the sound of the chains and pulley systems are stark and foreboding. The roars of the creatures are unforgettable and cut into you with their distorted malice. The sound of the ocean spray can be heard nearly everywhere on the island, and equally, the ambience of the seagulls all echo and reverb into themselves in an almost hypnotic way, and the rain is so overpowering that you can't ignore it. Underground, things continue with a reverb on footsteps to imply that the space you're in is somewhat infinite in size. The directional audio has flaws, but it works to make things more frightening. You can't really tell what direction one of the creatures is in, but you can definitely hear that it's getting closer. There's no voice acting, with everything being replaced with text. The sound design flaws are turned into its strengths, and its replication of sound effects from the PlayStation 1 era really make things more brutal and intense. That's 3 Harry Masons. Gore. There's scenes of characters coughing up black blood and human sacrifice added into the game, where you remove an orb from the stomach of a person. It's not very impactful and seems a little out of place, but it doesn't really get in the way with the rest of the game. That's 4 Harry Masons. Story. The game opens with the Lighthouse keeper vanishing following a series of mystifying events. The new keeper arrives and is tasked with keeping the lamp lit at night, but supernatural horrors are seemingly trying to prevent it. The game jumps backwards and forwards in time, and a lot of it was a bit disorientating, but the director's cut is much better at keeping things coherent over the original version of the game. It still feels like I left the experience with more questions than answers, and some of the flashbacks in the middle of the game really do ask a lot of questions, but ultimately I'm fine with not knowing what's going on for those parts. The ending is much more satisfying even if it's bleak. Really though, the story is steeped in mystery and all of it seems to be cryptic on purpose, which only adds more mystique to the game. Making the final score 5 out of 5 Harry Masons. The director's cut improves on nearly everything from the original and even adds some things that weren't necessary, like flashbacks to the town and the island, but they're fascinating to try and revival anyway. Again, I'd like to remind you this whole thing is down to my opinion of horror games, and if you don't share this opinion, then that's cool, I get it. Though I'd like to point out that there will always be more horror reviews in the pipeline, and thanks for watching. And always go check out Bumps in the middle of the night. Peace.